The fluorescent lights of Springfield Children's Hospital buzzed overhead as Sarah Thompson sat in the sterile examination room, her 6-month-old son Ethan cradled against her chest. She had noticed his breathing seemed labored that morning, and his tiny lips had taken on a faint bluish tint. Her motherly instinct had screamed that something was terribly wrong, so she'd rushed him to the emergency room at 6 a.m., her husband Michael speeding through red lights to get there faster. Now, 3 hours later, they sat waiting for Dr. Elena Martinez, the hospital's chief pediatric cardiologist, to return with test results. Sarah's hands trembled as she stroked Ethan's soft blonde hair. He had been such a happy baby, always smiling, gurgling with delight whenever his father made funny faces, reaching for his mother's nose with those perfect tiny fingers. Just last week, he had laughed for the first time, a sound so pure and beautiful that Sarah had recorded it on her phone and played it over and over. The door opened, and Dr. Martinez entered, followed by 2 nurses and a chaplain. Sarah's heart plummeted. She knew immediately. Doctors don't bring chaplains for good news. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Martinez began, her professional composure barely concealing the emotion in her dark eyes. Please, sit down. Just tell us, Michael said, his voice already breaking. Is our son going to be okay? Dr. Martinez pulled up a chair directly in front of them, a gesture Sarah would later remember as the moment her world ended. Ethan has a condition called hypoplastic left heart syndrome, with additional complications we've never seen before. His left ventricle is severely underdeveloped, and there are multiple abnormalities in the surrounding vessels. Sarah couldn't breathe. The words were coming at her like bullets, each one tearing through her hope. Can you fix it? Michael asked desperately. Surgery? A transplant? There has to be something. Dr. Martinez's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I wish I could give you different news. The syndrome itself is treatable with multiple surgeries, but Ethan's case is compounded by arterial malformations that make any surgical intervention impossible. His anatomy is too complex, too fragile. A transplant isn't viable because his entire cardiac structure wouldn't support a donor heart. What are you saying? Sarah whispered, though she already knew. She could feel the truth crushing her chest like a physical weight. I'm saying, Dr. Martinez continued, her voice barely above a whisper, that Ethan's heart is failing, and we cannot stop it. Based on the progression we're seeing in his scans and blood work, I estimate he has 2 weeks, possibly 3 at most. Sarah's scream split the air, a primal sound of a mother's anguish that echoed down the hospital corridors. Nurses in the hallway paused, their own eyes filling with tears for a family they didn't even know. Michael caught his wife as her legs gave out, and they crumpled together onto the cold linoleum floor, still holding their baby boy between them. No, 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 Sarah sobbed into Ethan's onesie, inhaling his sweet baby scent, the smell of Johnson's baby shampoo and innocence. He's only 6 months old. He hasn't even said his first word. He hasn't taken his first steps. This can't be happening. Please, God, this can't be happening. The chaplain, a kind-faced woman named Sister Margaret, knelt beside them. I know there are no words that can ease this pain, she said softly. But know that you're not alone. We'll help you through this, whatever you need. Dr. Martinez handed them paperwork about hospice care, pediatric palliative services, and grief counseling. The words on the pages blurred through Sarah's tears. How do you plan for your child's death? How do you even comprehend such a thing? 2 hours later, after signing countless forms and listening to nurses explain medication schedules and comfort measures, the Thompsons wheeled Ethan toward the hospital exit. Sarah pushed the stroller in a daze, her entire body numb with shock. Michael walked beside her, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles twitching, holding back his own breakdown. As they emerged into the parking lot, The afternoon sun seemed obscenely bright, the sky too blue for such a dark day. Their golden retriever Buddy was waiting in the car, his tail wagging excitedly as he always did when his family returned. Michael's mother had been watching the dog during the hospital visit. But the moment Sarah appeared carrying Ethan, everything changed. Buddy's ears flattened against his head. His tail stopped mid-wag and dropped between his legs. The 3-year-old retriever, usually bouncing with enthusiasm and slobbery kisses, stood completely still, staring at the baby with an intensity Sarah had never seen before. Then, as Sarah approached the car, Buddy lifted his head toward the sky and released a long, mournful howl, a sound so haunting, so filled with ancient knowing, that people in the parking lot stopped in their tracks and stared. "What's wrong with him?" Michael asked, alarmed. Sarah looked into Buddy's brown eyes and saw something that made her blood run cold. The dog knew. Somehow, impossibly, Buddy understood that Ethan was dying. And in that moment, their loyal family pet made a decision that would change everything. He would not leave the baby's side. Not for a single moment. Not until the very end. The Thompson farmhouse had never felt so small, so suffocating. Sarah and Michael spent the entire night converting their sunlit living room into what the hospice pamphlet coldly termed a comfort care space. They moved the couch against the wall, brought down Ethan's white wooden crib from the nursery upstairs, and surrounded it with every soft blanket and stuffed animal they owned. Michael installed a sophisticated baby monitor that tracked heart rate, oxygen levels, and breathing patterns, its small screen glowing ominously in the corner. By dawn, the house had transformed into a makeshift hospice ward, though Sarah refused to call it that. To her, it was still their home, still a place where her baby boy would be surrounded by love in whatever time remained. But nothing could have prepared them for Buddy's reaction. The moment they placed Ethan in his crib that first morning home, Buddy walked over with deliberate, measured steps. The golden retriever, who normally bounded everywhere with puppy-like enthusiasm despite being 3 years old, moved as though approaching something sacred. He sniffed Ethan gently, his wet nose barely touching the baby's tiny hand, and then lay down on the hardwood floor directly beside the crib. And he didn't move. "Buddy, come here, boy," Michael called from the kitchen an hour later, shaking the dog's food bowl, a sound that usually sent Buddy racing toward him. The dog's ears twitched, acknowledging he'd heard, but he didn't budge. His eyes remained fixed on Ethan. "He hasn't eaten since we got home," Sarah observed, kneeling beside the dog and running her fingers through his golden fur. "Buddy, you need to eat, sweetie." Buddy turned his head to look at her, and Sarah gasped. The dog's brown eyes were filled with such profound sadness, such knowing, that it seemed impossible for an animal to convey such depth of emotion. He licked her hand once, gently, then turned his attention back to the baby. By the second day, Sarah's mother, Patricia, arrived from Ohio with suitcases and a determination to help her daughter through the unthinkable. She brought casseroles, homemade bread, and endless supplies of tissues. She also brought Buddy's favorite treats, bacon-flavored chew bones that normally sent the dog into excited circles. "Here, Buddy," Patricia cooed, waving a treat in front of his nose. "Look what Grandma brought you." Buddy sniffed it politely, then turned away, uninterested. Patricia exchanged worried glances with her daughter. "That's not normal," she whispered. "He's always been food-motivated." On the third day, Rita Hernandez arrived for her first official visit as their hospice nurse. Rita was a stocky woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a practical bun. She'd been a hospice nurse for 23 years, and had seen countless families through their darkest hours. But even she paused when she saw Buddy's vigil. "How long has he been there?" Rita asked, checking Ethan's vital signs with practiced efficiency. 72 hours, Michael replied, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and crying. He's barely moved except to go outside twice to use the bathroom, and even then, he runs back immediately. He won't eat. He won't play. He just watches. Rita finished her examination and stood quietly, observing the dog. Buddy's head rested on his front paws, positioned so he could see directly into the crib. His tail, usually a blur of constant wagging, lay completely still behind him. "I've seen therapy dogs work with dying patients," Rita said softly, "but I've never seen anything quite like this. It's as if he's appointed himself as Ethan's personal guardian." That assessment proved prophetic. At 2:47 a.m. on the fourth night, Sarah was finally sleeping in her bedroom for the first time since they'd come home. Michael had convinced her she needed rest, promising he'd wake her if anything changed. He was dozing in the armchair beside the crib when Buddy suddenly started barking loud, urgent, insistent barks that shattered the quiet house. Sarah bolted from her bed and ran downstairs, her heart pounding. Michael was already awake, checking the monitors. Ethan's oxygen saturation had dropped to 72%, dangerously low. The baby's lips had turned blue, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. "Oh God," Sarah cried, reaching for her son. She adjusted his oxygen cannula, elevated his head slightly, and within minutes, his levels began to stabilize. Crisis averted. She looked at Buddy, who had stopped barking the instant she entered the room. The dog sat at attention, his tail wagging once, slowly, as if to say, "I called you. He needed you. How did you know?" Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "How did you know before the monitors alerted us?" This pattern repeated itself over the following days. Somehow, inexplicably, Buddy could sense when Ethan was in distress before any machine could detect it. When the baby's breathing became labored, Buddy would whimper softly and nudge Sarah's leg. When Ethan's heart rate became irregular, Buddy would place his paw on Michael's foot and stare up at him intensely. On day 7, Sarah installed a camera to monitor Buddy's behavior when she wasn't in the room. What she witnessed on the footage made her weep. At 4 p.m., when no one else was watching, Ethan's tiny hand had slipped through the crib slats. Buddy had immediately stood up, gently taken the baby's hand in his mouth, so carefully, so tenderly, and guided it back inside to safety. Then the dog had pressed his nose against Ethan's palm, as if reassuring him, "I'm here. You're not alone." Sarah called their veterinarian, Dr. Jennifer Chun, in a panic. "Something's wrong with Buddy. He won't eat. He won't leave Ethan's side. He's losing weight. Can you come examine him?" Dr. Chun arrived that evening with her medical bag. She conducted a thorough examination: temperature, heart rate, reflexes, everything. Physically, Buddy was fine, just slightly underweight from not eating properly. "There's nothing medically wrong with him," Dr. Chun concluded, packing up her equipment. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sarah, I know this might sound strange, but in veterinary medicine, we recognize that dogs can experience anticipatory grief. They understand death in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. Buddy knows Ethan is dying, and he's chosen to be present for every moment. He's mourning while trying to protect. He's saying goodbye," Sarah whispered, the realization hitting her like a wave. "Yes," Dr. Chun confirmed, her own eyes misting over. "In his own way, he's saying goodbye. And more than that, he's showing Ethan he's loved, that he won't die alone." Dogs have an extraordinary capacity for compassion. That night, Sarah brought her pillow and blankets downstairs. She lay on the floor beside Buddy, one hand reaching through the crib slats to hold Ethan's tiny fingers, her other hand resting on Buddy's warm, furry side. "Thank you," she whispered to the dog. "Thank you for loving him." Buddy's tail thumped twice against the floor, and together, mother, baby, and faithful guardian, they faced the long, uncertain night ahead. News traveled fast in Springfield, a tight-knit town of just 8,000 residents where everybody knew everybody's business. By day 8 of Ethan's homecoming, word had spread through the community like wildfire. The Thompson baby was dying, and their dog was maintaining an around-the-clock vigil that defied explanation. It started small. On Sunday morning, the Thompsons' neighbor, Mrs. Adelaide Hughes, an elderly widow who lived 3 houses down, appeared at their door with a still warm apple pie. "I know you probably can't eat," she said softly, her weathered hands trembling as she handed Sarah the dish. "But you need to keep your strength up for that precious boy." By Sunday evening, the Thompsons' front porch was covered with casseroles, lasagnas, fruit baskets, and homemade bread. Cards were tucked into every dish, some with prayers, others with simple messages like, "We're thinking of you, and Ethan is in our hearts." On Monday morning, Tom Chun, owner of Chun's Family Bakery on Main Street, placed a glass jar on his counter with a handwritten sign, "Ethan's Fund Help the Thompson Family." He had expected maybe a few dollars in donations. By noon, the jar was overflowing. By closing time, he had collected $847 in cash and checks. People kept coming in, Tom told his wife that night, his eyes red from crying. Old ladies on fixed incomes gave $20. Teenagers emptied their pockets. Mrs. Rodriguez brought in her grandkids' piggy banks. Everyone wanted to help. Word reached Springfield Elementary School, where Sarah had taught 3rd grade before Ethan was born. Principal Janet Morrison called an emergency assembly on Tuesday morning. She stood on the gymnasium stage, looking out at 340 students, and told them about their former teacher's baby boy, who was very sick. "Sometimes," Principal Morrison said, her voice echoing through the gym, "the greatest thing we can do is show someone they're not alone, that we care." The school erupted into action. 1st graders made construction paper hearts covered in glitter and stickers. 4th graders wrote letters to Ethan, telling him about clouds and angels. A 6th grade art class created a massive banner painted with butterflies and stars that read, "Fly high. Baby Ethan, you are loved." By Wednesday, the banner hung on the fence outside the Thompson house, visible to everyone who drove past. Cars began slowing down, drivers reading the message, many pulling over to leave flowers tied to the fence posts. Springfield High School's football team heard the story from Coach Davidson, whose daughter had been in Sarah's 3rd grade class years ago. The Wildcats were preparing for the state championship game that Friday night, the biggest game in the school's history. Team captain Derek Williams stood up in the locker room during practice. "We're wearing blue ribbons on our helmets," he announced. "Blue for baby Ethan. We play for him Friday night." His teammates erupted in agreement. By Thursday afternoon, the entire town knew the Wildcats were dedicating their championship game to a 6-month-old baby they'd never met and his devoted dog. The local newspaper, the Springfield Chronicle, ran a front-page story on Thursday with a photo that would become iconic in the community. A photographer named Marcus Reed had knocked gently on the Thompsons' door and asked permission to document Buddy's vigil. Sarah, exhausted and emotionally drained, had agreed, hoping it might bring awareness to childhood heart disease. The photo Marcus captured was breathtaking in its simplicity. It showed Buddy lying beside the crib, his head resting on his paws, eyes fixed on Ethan. The baby's tiny hand dangled through the crib slats, his fingers touching the top of Buddy's head. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, creating an almost ethereal glow around them. The headline read, "A Dog's Faithful Love. Buddy keeps watch over dying baby Ethan Thompson." The story went beyond Springfield. By Thursday evening, the photo had been shared on Facebook 10,000 times. Local news stations from neighboring cities called, requesting interviews. Sarah politely declined them. All her focus was on Ethan, not publicity. but she couldn't stop the community's outpouring of love. On Friday evening, as the sun began to set, something extraordinary happened. Father Patrick O'Brien from St. Mary's Catholic Church walked up the Thompsons' front path, followed by a line of people that stretched down the street and around the corner. He had organized a prayer vigil, expecting maybe 50 people to show up. Over 300 came instead. They filled the front yard, spilled onto the sidewalk, and lined the quiet residential street. They held candles in paper cups, their flames flickering in the gentle evening breeze. Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, atheists, didn't matter. They had all come for the same reason, to surround a dying baby and his family with love. Michael stepped onto the front porch, overwhelmed by the sight. Sarah stood beside him, Ethan bundled in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Through the window, they could see Buddy inside, pressed against the glass, watching. Father O'Brien led the gathering in prayer, his Irish accent thick with emotion. "We don't always understand why suffering comes to the innocent," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "We don't know why babies get sick or why good people face unbearable pain. But what I've witnessed this past week has restored my faith in humanity." He paused, looking directly at the Thompsons. "This dog, Buddy, has shown us something profound. He hasn't left that baby's side for 8 days. He doesn't understand theology or philosophy. He just loves, purely and completely, asking nothing in return. He's teaching us what faith truly looks like, being present in someone's darkest hour, offering comfort when there are no words, refusing to let them face death alone." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone started singing "Amazing Grace," and soon 300 voices joined in harmony, the sound rising into the darkening sky. Inside the house, something strange happened. Ethan, who had been lethargic all day, suddenly opened his eyes wide. He looked around as if hearing the singing, a small smile crossing his tiny face. Buddy immediately stood up, tail wagging for the first time in days, and released a single joyful bark. Sarah gasped. "Michael, he's smiling. Look, he's really smiling." For 5 beautiful minutes, as the town sang for him, baby Ethan seemed peaceful, even happy. His breathing steadied. His color improved slightly. It was as if the collective love of 300 people had given him a momentary reprieve from his suffering. When the song ended, Ethan closed his eyes again, settling back into sleep. But something had shifted. The family felt it. The town felt it. Later that night, after the crowd had dispersed and the candles had been extinguished, Sarah sat in the rocking chair, holding Ethan, while Buddy resumed his position on the floor. She looked down at her faithful dog and whispered, "You knew they'd come, didn't you? You knew we wouldn't face this alone." Buddy's tail thumped softly against the hardwood floor. Outside, Tom Chun from the bakery counted the day's donations. Ethan's fund had reached $52,000, enough to cover all medical expenses and funeral costs, with money left over to donate to pediatric heart disease research. Springfield had rallied around one of their own, proving that even in the face of inevitable tragedy, love and community could create something beautiful. But Buddy's vigil was far from over. In fact, the most mysterious part was yet to come. Day 12 arrived with an unsettling shift in Buddy's behavior that no one could explain. The golden retriever, who had been so steadfast and calm in his vigil beside Ethan's crib, suddenly became agitated in a way that deeply troubled the entire household. It started at exactly 6 a.m. Sarah was half asleep in the rocking chair, her hand resting protectively on Ethan's chest, feeling the irregular rhythm of his failing heart. The sunrise was just beginning to paint the living room windows with soft pink light when Buddy abruptly stood up, his ears perked forward with intense focus. He walked directly to the back door, stopped, and barked 3 times. Not his usual playful bark, but something different, urgent, purposeful, almost commanding. Then, just as suddenly, he turned around and walked back to the crib, circling it 3 times before lying down again in his usual spot. What was that about? Michael mumbled, emerging from the kitchen with dark circles under his eyes and a coffee mug clutched in his trembling hands. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in almost 2 weeks. "I have no idea," Sarah whispered, not wanting to wake Ethan, who had finally fallen into a fitful sleep after a difficult night. "Maybe he needs to go out." Michael opened the back door, calling softly, "Buddy, come on, boy." "Outside?" But Buddy didn't move. He remained at his post, eyes fixed on the baby, as if his earlier behavior had never happened. 1 hour later, at exactly 7 a.m., it happened again. 3 barks at the back door, then back to the crib, 3 circles, and down. The precision of it was eerie, almost mechanical. By noon, the pattern had repeated 6 times, once every hour on the hour. Sarah's mother, Patricia, who had been staying with them, was unnerved. "That's not normal dog behavior," she said, wringing her hands anxiously. "It's like he's trying to tell you something." "But what?" Sarah asked desperately, watching Buddy complete his strange ritual for the 7th time. "What are you trying to say, boy?" On the 8th repetition, at 1 p.m., Sarah decided to follow him. When Buddy barked at the back door, she quickly opened it and stepped outside, trailing behind as the dog trotted purposefully into the backyard. The Thompson property was modest, about an acre of land with a vegetable garden, a small shed, and at the far end, a magnificent old oak tree. It was under this tree 5 years earlier that Sarah had scattered her grandmother Rose's ashes, honoring the elderly woman's wish to rest in a place of natural beauty. Buddy walked straight to the oak tree without hesitation. He sat down at a very specific spot near the base of the trunk, about 3 feet from where the massive roots broke through the earth. He stared at that spot intensely, then looked back at Sarah, then back at the spot, then back at Sarah again. "What is it, Buddy?" Sarah knelt beside him, examining the ground. She saw nothing unusual, just dirt, some dried leaves, a few small rocks. "There's nothing here, boy." Buddy whimpered, a sound of pure frustration, and pawed at the ground twice before turning and trotting back to the house. Sarah followed, more confused than ever. The ritual continued every hour throughout the afternoon. Michael tried following Buddy on the 3 p.m. repetition and witnessed the exact same thing, the dog sitting at that precise spot by the oak tree, staring, waiting, as if expecting something to appear. "Should we call the vet again?" Patricia suggested nervously. "Maybe he's having some kind of neurological episode? A seizure disorder?" "No," Michael said slowly, his analytical engineer's mind working through the problem. "This isn't random. It's too precise, too consistent. He's trying to communicate something specific. Dogs don't develop hourly behavioral patterns without a reason." Rita, the hospice nurse, arrived for her evening check-in at 5 p.m. She had been with the family long enough now to understand Buddy's role in this heartbreaking situation. But even she was puzzled by this new development. "I've worked with therapy dogs and service animals for years," Rita said, watching Buddy complete his ritual once more. "I've seen dogs alert to seizures, detect cancer, sense when death is imminent. But I've never seen anything like this rhythmic, repetitive behavior directed at a specific location." She checked Ethan's vitals with practiced efficiency. Her expression grew more somber than usual. "His oxygen saturation is dropping," she said quietly. "His heart rate is becoming more irregular. We're entering the final stage now. It could be hours, or maybe a day or 2 at most." Sarah felt her knees weaken. Even though she'd known this moment was coming, hearing Rita confirm it made it horrifyingly real. She picked up Ethan, holding him close, feeling his tiny, labored breaths against her neck. "My baby," she whispered brokenly. "My sweet, perfect baby?" That evening, family members began arriving. Sarah's father drove up from Florida. Michael's two brothers came with their wives. The house filled with quiet, tearful relatives who took turns holding Ethan, memorizing his face, whispering their love and their goodbyes. Through it all, Buddy maintained his strange hourly ritual. At 6 p.m., 3 barks, the back door, the oak tree, return. At 7 p.m., the same. At 8 p.m., again. Michael set up his laptop and started researching canine behavior, looking for any explanation. He found articles about dogs sensing earthquakes before they happen, dogs detecting carbon monoxide leaks, dogs knowing when their owners were about to have heart attacks. But nothing explained this specific time-based pattern directed at a particular spot in the yard. At 11 p.m., as relatives settled in for what everyone knew might be their final night with Ethan, Buddy's behavior intensified. When he barked at the back door this time, he didn't just bark 3 times, he barked continuously, frantically, scratching at the door with such force that he left deep gouges in the wood. "Buddy, stop!" Michael shouted, exhausted and emotionally raw. "Stop it!" But the dog wouldn't stop. He barked and scratched and whined, his desperation palpable, his frustration evident. Finally, Michael opened the door in exasperation, and Buddy bolted into the night, running full speed toward the oak tree. This time, he didn't just sit and stare. He began digging. His front paws worked furiously, dirt flying behind him in dark arcs, his determination absolute. Michael ran after him with a flashlight, shouting for him to stop. But Buddy was possessed with purpose, digging deeper and deeper into the earth. "What has gotten into you?" Michael yelled, grabbing Buddy's collar and trying to pull him away. But then the flashlight beam caught something in the hole Buddy had created. A glint of metal, barely visible beneath the disturbed soil. Michael's heart stopped. He knelt down, his hands shaking, and carefully brushed away more dirt. There was something there. Something that had been buried deliberately, hidden for years. Something that Buddy had known about all along. "Sarah!" Michael called out, his voice cracking with emotion. "Sarah, you need to come out here right now." Inside the house, Ethan's breathing had become critically labored. The baby monitor was beeping frantically. Time was running out. But whatever Buddy had been trying to show them for the past 12 hours was finally about to be revealed. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like this discovery was connected to everything to Ethan. To death, to love, to faith. The dog sat beside the hole he'd dug, panting heavily, his tongue lolling out, his eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like relief. He had finally made them understand. Now they just had to uncover what he'd found. Day 14 dawned with a silence, so heavy it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The sunrise painted the Springfield sky in shades of amber and rose, beautiful and cruel in its indifference to the tragedy unfolding inside the Thompson farmhouse. Sarah hadn't slept at all. She sat in the rocking chair, Ethan cradled against her chest, feeling each labored breath her son took, as if it might be his last. His tiny body had grown cooler during the night, his skin taking on a translucent quality that made him look almost ethereal. His lips, once pink and perfect, were now a dusky blue that no amount of oxygen could remedy. "He's not in pain," Rita had assured them during her 5 a.m. visit, checking the baby's vital signs with gentle, practiced hands. But then she had done something she'd never done before. She'd pulled both Sarah and Michael aside, away from the relatives sleeping on couches and floors throughout the house. "His heart is failing rapidly now," Rita said softly, her professional composure cracking slightly. "His blood pressure is dropping, His organs are beginning to shut down. Based on what I'm seeing, you have hours left. Maybe 8, maybe less. You should call anyone who wants to say goodbye. The words landed like physical blows. Hours, not days. Not even a full day. Hours. Michael's face crumpled, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sarah simply nodded, numb, her capacity for shock exhausted. She had cried so many tears over the past 2 weeks that she felt hollow now, emptied out, existing in a strange space between grief and grace. The phone calls went out at dawn. Sarah's brother in California. Michael's elderly parents in Maine. Close friends from college. The pastor from their church. Everyone who loved Ethan. Everyone who needed to say goodbye. By 9 a.m., the house was filling with people. They came in quietly, reverently, as if entering a sacred space. Because that's what the living room had become, a sanctuary where a baby prepared to leave the earth, surrounded by more love than most people experience in a lifetime. Sarah's best friend Jessica arrived from 2 states away, having driven through the night. She took one look at Sarah's face and burst into tears, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." Michael's 3 brothers stood in the corner, these big, tough construction workers who'd never been comfortable with emotions, openly weeping and holding each other. Michael's mother sat on the couch, rosary beads wrapped around her trembling fingers, praying in whispered Italian. Through it all, Buddy remained at his post beside the crib, but something had changed in the dog's demeanor. He was restless now, anxious, his eyes darting between Ethan and the back door. He would stand up, pace 3 steps, lie back down, then repeat the process minutes later. "He knows," Patricia whispered to Rita. "Animals always know." At noon, Father O'Brien arrived to perform last rites. The elderly priest had baptized Ethan just 4 months earlier in a joyful ceremony filled with hope and celebration. Now he stood over the same baby, his weathered hands shaking as he made the sign of the cross, anointing Ethan's forehead with holy oil. Through this holy anointing, may the Lord in his love and mercy help you with the grace of the Holy Spirit, Father O'Brien intoned, his voice breaking. May the Lord who frees you from sin save you and raise you up. The gathered family responded in unison. Amen. By 2 p.m., Ethan's breathing had become increasingly irregular, several rapid, shallow breaths followed by long, terrifying pauses where he didn't breathe at all. Each time, Sarah would hold her own breath, waiting, praying, begging for one more. And each time, Ethan would gasp and start breathing again. "It's called Cheyne-Stokes respiration," Rita explained gently. "It's part of the dying process. His body is shutting down." The words sounded clinical, medical, but what they meant was unbearable. Her baby was leaving her. At 3 p.m., something extraordinary happened. Ethan, who had been largely unresponsive all day, suddenly opened his eyes, those beautiful blue eyes that looked just like his father's. He looked directly at Sarah, and for one crystalline moment, he seemed completely present, completely aware. "Hi, baby," Sarah whispered through her tears, her voice tender and breaking. "Mama's here. Daddy's here. We love you so much. So much." Ethan's tiny mouth curved into what looked unmistakably like a smile, not a reflexive grimace, but a real, genuine smile. Several people in the room gasped. Michael leaned in close, his tears falling onto his son's blanket. "That's right, buddy," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're all here. You're not alone. You're surrounded by love." The moment lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but it felt eternal. Then Ethan's eyes slowly closed again, and his breathing resumed its irregular pattern. But everyone in that room had witnessed something profound, a baby saying goodbye, acknowledging the love surrounding him, giving his parents one last precious gift. At 3:30 p.m., Buddy's behavior escalated dramatically. He stood up and began barking, not the purposeful 3 barks of the previous days, but frantic, continuous barking. He ran to the back door and scratched at it violently, his anxiety palpable. "What's wrong with him?" Jessica asked, alarmed. "He's been doing this," Michael explained wearily. "He keeps wanting to go to this one spot in the backyard. We don't know why." But now Buddy's desperation had reached a fever pitch. He barked and whined and scratched, then ran back to the crib, looked at Ethan, and ran back to the door again. His message was clear. There was something outside, something important, something they needed to see right now. "Maybe we should let him show us," Rita suggested quietly. "Sometimes dogs sense things we don't understand. Maybe there's a reason he's so insistent." Michael looked at Sarah. She was holding Ethan, rocking him gently, singing, "You Are My Sunshine," in a voice so broken it barely qualified as singing. She nodded slightly, giving permission. Michael opened the back door, and Buddy exploded into the yard like he'd been shot from a cannon. He ran full speed toward the old oak tree, the tree where Sarah's grandmother, Rose's ashes had been scattered 5 years earlier, and immediately began digging at the same spot he'd been fixated on for days. But this time, he dug with unprecedented fury. Dirt flew in massive arcs behind him. His paws were bleeding from the effort, but he didn't stop. He dug deeper and deeper, creating a hole nearly 2 feet deep. "Buddy, stop!" Michael called, running after him. "You're going to hurt yourself." But the dog wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. This was his mission, his purpose, and time was running out. Then Michael saw a glint of metal in the earth, just as he had the night before when Buddy had first started digging. But now, with daylight and Buddy's deeper excavation, he could see it clearly. It was a small metal box, ornate and old, partially corroded by years in the soil. Michael's hands shook as he reached down and pulled it free. The box was about 6 inches square, surprisingly heavy, with a delicate rose pattern engraved on its lid. His heart stopped. He knew this box. "Oh my God," Michael whispered, staring at it in disbelief. "Oh my God, Sarah, Sarah." Inside the house, Ethan's breathing had become critically shallow. The baby monitor was beeping frantically, alarm after alarm. Rita was checking his pulse, her face grave. But Michael was running toward the house, clutching the metal box, Buddy racing alongside him, barking triumphantly. Whatever was in this box, whatever Grandma Rose had buried beneath that oak tree. 5 years ago, Buddy had been determined to uncover it before Ethan died. And now, in these final precious hours, they were about to discover why. Michael burst through the back door, the metal box clutched against his chest, dirt covering his hands and clothes. Buddy bounded in beside him, tail wagging furiously for the first time in 2 weeks, his entire body vibrating with what could only be described as relief. "Sarah!" Michael called out, his voice cracking with urgency and something else, something that sounded almost like hope. "Sarah, you need to see this." The living room fell silent. All the relatives, friends, and Father O'Brien turned to look at Michael standing in the doorway, covered in dirt, holding what appeared to be an old, corroded metal box decorated with roses. Sarah looked up from where she sat cradling Ethan, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "Michael, what?" She stopped mid-sentence, her breath catching in her throat. She recognized the box immediately. That's Grandma Rose's prayer box," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I haven't seen that since before she died. I thought it was lost when we cleaned out her apartment." Patricia, Sarah's mother, gasped audibly and stood up from the couch. "Rose's prayer box? Are you certain?" She moved closer, her hand covering her mouth. "She told me she'd buried it somewhere meaningful, but she never said where." She said it was for when the time was right. I always thought she was just being sentimental in her old age. Michael crossed the room and knelt beside Sarah's rocking chair, placing the box gently on her lap. Up close, they could see it more clearly. The once shiny brass had tarnished to a dull greenish brown, the engraved roses barely visible beneath years of corrosion. Small clumps of dirt still clung to its sides. "But he found it," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's been trying to show us for 2 days. He knew it was there. He knew we needed to find it." Sarah stared down at the box, one arm still holding Ethan close, her other hand trembling as she reached out to touch the lid. But why? Why would Grandma Rose bury this under the oak tree? Why would Buddy know about it? "There's only one way to find out," Patricia said softly, kneeling beside her daughter. "Open it, sweetheart." Sarah's hands shook violently as she tried to open the corroded clasp. It wouldn't budge. Years of moisture and earth had sealed it tight. Michael gently took the box and, using his pocket knife, carefully pried the clasp open. It gave way with a soft click that seemed to echo through the hushed room. Everyone leaned in closer. Michael's brothers, Jessica, Father O'Brien, Rita the nurse. Even the relatives who'd been sleeping in the back bedrooms had emerged, drawn by the commotion. The only sounds were Ethan's irregular breathing and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Sarah lifted the lid. Inside, protected by the watertight seal, were dozens of small pieces of paper, each one carefully folded and preserved. They were yellowed with age, but completely dry and intact. The top piece of paper was larger than the others, and it was addressed in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting, the beautiful, flowing cursive of someone educated in Catholic schools in the 1940s. Sarah unfolded it with trembling fingers and began to read aloud, her voice breaking. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you are facing a darkness I prayed you would never have to endure. But God has shown me in my dreams that one day, someone you love dearly, someone small, someone innocent, someone whose time on earth will be far too brief, will need these words. I have been collecting prayers, blessings, and words of comfort my entire life. Every prayer that brought me peace during my own losses. Every verse that sustained me when your grandfather died. Every blessing that helped me understand that death is not an ending, but a transformation. They are all here, preserved for you. These prayers are for the babies yet to come, for the little ones who will be called home too soon, for the parents who must face the unbearable task of saying goodbye to their own children. My darling girl, I want you to know your baby is not being taken from you. Your baby is being called home to a place of no more pain, no more suffering, no more struggling for each breath. What feels like loss to us is actually freedom for them. You will survive this, though you cannot imagine how. You will carry this child in your heart for the rest of your life. And when your own time comes to cross over, the first voice you will hear calling your name will be theirs. Death is simply walking into the next room. The love never ends. The love never ends. Until we meet again in the place where there are no more tears, your Grandma Rose. P.S. Trust the dog. Dogs understand things about love and death that we humans have forgotten. The last line made Sarah gasp a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She looked at Buddy, who sat at attention beside the crib, his tail wagging slowly, his brown eyes knowing and kind. She knew, Sarah whispered in awe. Somehow, Grandma Rose knew this would happen. She knew we have a baby who would. She couldn't finish the sentence. Patricia was crying openly now, her hand clutching Father O'Brien's arm for support. Rose had prophetic dreams her entire life, she said through her tears. She always said God showed her things before they happened. I never fully believed her, but this... She gestured at the box. How else could she have known? Michael took out another piece of paper from the box and unfolded it. It was a prayer, written in Rose's hand. Heavenly Father, grant this family the grace to release what they cannot hold, the strength to endure what they cannot change, and the faith to believe that love transcends all boundaries, even death itself. He pulled out another. May you find peace in knowing that your child's purpose was fulfilled, not in years lived, but in love given and received. And another. For parents grieving an infant, you did not fail. You loved perfectly. That is enough. That is everything. Tears streamed down Michael's face as he read each one. There were at least 50 prayers in the box, each one specifically written for parents losing a child, each one addressing the exact pain and questions they were experiencing. Jessica, Sarah's best friend, pulled out a small scroll and unfolded it. This one says, "The length of a life is not measured in time, but in impact. Your baby has already changed the world simply by being loved." Rita, the hospice nurse who had seen countless deaths in her career, wiped tears from her eyes with her sleeve. "In 23 years of hospice work," she said, her voice wavering, "I have never witnessed anything like this. This is divine." Father O'Brien nodded in agreement, his weathered face wet with tears. "Grandma Rose left you exactly what you needed, exactly when you needed it. And your faithful Buddy here," he reached down to pat the dog's head, "he was entrusted with showing you where to find it. This is grace. This is love operating beyond the boundaries of life and death." Buddy barked once a soft, affirming sound and placed his paw gently on Sarah's foot. Sarah looked down at Ethan, whose breathing had become even more shallow and irregular. But something had shifted inside her. The crushing despair that had been suffocating her for 2 weeks had lifted slightly, replaced by something she couldn't quite name. Not happiness, that was impossible. But perhaps acceptance? Peace? She held up the box, now understanding its purpose. "Grandma Rose left us this, so we'd know Ethan's life had meaning," Sarah said softly. "So we'd know that even though his time here was short, he was loved beyond measure. And so we'd have the strength to let him go." Michael wrapped his arms around his wife and son, burying his face in Sarah's hair. "She gave us permission to say goodbye," he whispered. Patricia gathered all the prayer papers and began laying them out on the coffee table, creating a circle of blessings around Ethan's crib. The family members each picked up a prayer and read it aloud, their voices joining in a chorus of comfort and faith. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Buddy settled back down beside the crib, his sacred mission finally complete. He had found what his family needed. He had delivered Grandma Rose's final gift. Now, he would help them through the hardest part, the letting go. At 6:15 p.m., while the family was still gathered around Ethan reading prayers from Grandma Rose's miraculous box, Sarah's younger sister Jennifer made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and snapped a single photograph. The image captured everything. Buddy lying faithfully beside the crib, his head resting on his paws, eyes watching Ethan with unwavering devotion. Sarah in the rocking chair, holding her dying baby close, tears streaming down her face, but with an expression of profound peace. The prayer box open on the coffee table, papers spread around it like fallen leaves. Golden evening light streaming through the window, making the whole scene look almost ethereal, almost holy. Jennifer typed a simple caption. "This dog dug up my grandmother's prayer box that had been buried for 5 years." Inside were prayers written specifically for parents losing a baby. "My nephew Ethan is dying today, and somehow, Buddy knew we needed to find this. I've never believed in miracles until now. Please pray for baby Ethan. #FaithfulDog, #baby Ethan, #miracle in Springfield." She posted it to Facebook at 6:18 p.m. and set her phone down, not expecting much. Maybe some friends would comment. Maybe a few people would share it. She just wanted to document this incredible moment, to honor Buddy's mysterious devotion and her grandmother's impossible foresight. By 6:45 p.m., the post had 200 shares. By 7 p.m., it had 2,000 shares and was spreading beyond Springfield to neighboring towns. By 8 p.m., it had 50,000 shares and had jumped state lines. Jennifer's phone started buzzing incessantly with notifications. "Sarah," she said, her voice filled with disbelief, "you need to see this. The post is going viral. People all over the country are seeing Buddy's story." Sarah barely heard her, focused entirely on Ethan, but Michael walked over and looked at Jennifer's phone. His eyes widened. There are hundreds of thousands of people sharing this," he whispered in shock. By 9 p.m., major news outlets had picked up the story. CNN's homepage featured the headline, "Dying Baby, Faithful Dog, and Buried Prayers, the story that's making millions cry." Good Morning America's producers were calling Jennifer's phone. The Today Show wanted an exclusive interview. Entertainment Tonight, Inside Edition, and every major network news program was scrambling to send reporters to Springfield. By 10 p.m., the post had been shared 5 million times and had gone international. People in Tokyo were reading about Buddy. Families in London were crying over baby Ethan. Australians were commenting with prayers. A woman in Brazil translated the story to Portuguese, and it spread throughout South America within an hour. The Thompson family's small farmhouse became ground zero for a global moment of collective grief and wonder. Comments poured in by the tens of thousands. "I lost my daughter 20 years ago, and I've never found peace until reading those prayers. Thank you for sharing this." Another read, "I don't believe in God, but this dog has made me reconsider everything." Someone wrote, "I'm a nurse in palliative care, and I'm going to print these prayers for every family I work with." A Hollywood producer named David Chun called offering $2 million for the movie rights. "This is the most powerful story I've encountered in 30 years in this industry," he said. Michael politely declined. "This isn't about money. This is about my son." By midnight, the fundraiser that Tom Chun had started at his Bakery Ethan's Fund had exploded. The original $52,000 raised locally was nothing compared to what was pouring in now. Donations came from every corner of the globe. $10 from a schoolteacher in Kenya, $100 from a doctor in Norway, $5,000 from a grieving mother in Texas who'd lost her own baby, $50,000 from an anonymous Silicon Valley CEO by 1 a.m. The fund had reached $847,000. News trucks began arriving in Springfield around 2 a.m., their satellite dishes lighting up the quiet residential street. Reporters set up camps on the lawn across from the Thompson house, respectfully staying back, but ready to capture whatever happened next. Springfield's mayor, Robert Harrison, held an emergency press conference at 3 a.m. "We are asking media to respect this family's privacy during their darkest hour," he pleaded into microphones. Baby Ethan is in his final hours. The Thompsons need space to say goodbye. But the story was too big, too powerful to contain. By dawn, Springfield was overrun with news crews, curious onlookers, and people who had driven hours just to stand outside the Thompson house and pray. Father O'Brien organized an impromptu vigil in the town square at 6 a.m. He expected maybe 100 people. Over 5,000 showed up, instead locals, mixed with strangers who'd driven through the night from surrounding states, all wanting to be part of this moment. They stood in the early morning light, holding candles, many holding photos of their own lost children. A mother from Ohio held a picture of her son who died of leukemia at age 4. A father from Tennessee clutched a tiny urn containing his stillborn daughter's ashes. A grandmother from Pennsylvania brought a teddy bear that had belonged to her grandson who drowned. "This isn't just about baby Ethan anymore," Father O'Brien said to the massive crowd, his voice amplified through speakers. "This story has touched something universal in the human heart. We've all lost someone. We've all wondered if there's meaning in suffering. And this faithful dog, this miraculous box of prayers, this family's grace under unbearable circumstances, it's reminding us that love is stronger than death." The crowd erupted in applause, tears streaming down thousands of faces as the sun rose over Springfield. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah was watching the news coverage on her phone, overwhelmed and bewildered. "Michael, there are millions of people praying for our baby," she said in disbelief. "Millions. People we'll never meet, from countries I can barely pronounce. All sending love to Ethan." She looked down at her son, whose tiny chest was barely rising now, whose lips were nearly purple, whose time was measured in minutes rather than hours. "Do you hear that, baby?" she whispered to him. "The whole world knows your name. The whole world loves you." At 7:30 a.m., Springfield's mayor announced that over $1.2 million had been raised for Ethan's fund. Any money beyond medical and funeral expenses will be donated to pediatric heart disease research in Ethan's name, he declared. "This baby's brief life will save other babies. His story will give hope to countless grieving families." Inside the house, Rita checked Ethan's vitals one final time. She looked at Sarah and Michael with gentle, knowing eyes. "It's time," she said softly. "His heart is giving out. It's happening now." The viral sensation, the millions of shares, the news trucks, the money, the crowds, none of it mattered anymore. Sarah held her baby boy close and began singing "You Are My Sunshine" one last time. Buddy stood up from his spot beside the crib and did something extraordinary. He walked over to Sarah and gently placed his head on her lap, right next to Ethan, creating a triangle of love, mother, baby, and faithful dog. Outside, 5,000 people in the town square fell silent, as if they somehow knew the moment had arrived. The whole world was watching, praying, crying together. And in that small farmhouse in Springfield, surrounded by family and a dog who'd never given up on his sacred mission, baby Ethan prepared to take his final breath, his short life having touched more hearts than most people touch in 100 years. At 7:47 p.m. on day 15, as golden hour light painted the living room in shades of honey and amber, baby Ethan James Thompson took his final breath in his mother's arms. There was no panic, no screaming, no desperate attempts at resuscitation, just profound sacred peace. Sarah sat in the rocking chair that had become her home for 2 weeks, cradling her son against her heart one last time. She had been singing "You Are My Sunshine," his favorite song, the one that always made him smile when she felt his tiny body relax completely, felt his labored breathing simply ... stop. "He's gone," she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the universe itself. "My baby's gone." Michael knelt beside them, his forehead pressed against Sarah's shoulder, one hand gently touching Ethan's soft blonde hair. He didn't sob or wail. Instead, he spoke directly to his son. "You are so brave, buddy. So strong. Daddy's so proud of you. You can rest now. You don't have to fight anymore." Buddy lay with his head on Sarah's lap, right next to Ethan, his warm body providing silent comfort. The faithful golden retriever released a long, gentle sigh, a sound so human, so filled with both sorrow and relief, that everyone in the room felt it in their souls. Rita stepped forward quietly and checked for a pulse, though she already knew. She looked at the clock and made the official note, time of death, 7:47 p.m. Then she did something she'd never done in 23 years of hospice nursing. She knelt down and prayed aloud. Thank you, God, for this precious life. Thank you for allowing us to witness such love. Welcome this beautiful baby home. The room filled with an inexplicable warmth, despite it being a cool March evening. Several people would later swear they felt a gentle breeze pass through the closed room, carrying with it the faint scent of roses, Grandma Rose's signature perfume. Father O'Brien began reading from one of the prayers in the miraculous box. Death is not the end, but simply walking into the next room. The love remains. The love always remains. And one day, when it is your time to cross over, the first voice you will hear calling your name will be theirs. Sarah looked down at Ethan's peaceful face. His struggles were over. No more gasping for air. No more blue lips. No more failing heart causing him pain. He looked serene, almost as if he were simply sleeping, finally at rest after weeks of suffering. Thank you for choosing me to be your mama, Sarah whispered, kissing his forehead one last time. Even if it was only for 6 months, even if it broke my heart, I would do it all over again just to love you. The family members took turns saying their goodbyes, each one placing a hand on Ethan, speaking words of love and farewell. Michael's brothers, these tough construction workers, wept openly. Patricia held her grandson one final time, singing a Polish lullaby her own mother had sung to her. Jessica read a poem she'd written during the long night, her voice breaking with every line. Outside, in the town square where 5,000 people still kept vigil, someone began ringing the church bells. Father O'Brien had sent word that baby Ethan had passed, and the bells tolled 15 times 1 for each day of his journey home. The massive crowd fell to their knees in unison, a wave of humanity bowing in respect for a baby they'd never met but had grown to love. Strangers held each other and cried. Candles were lit by the thousands, turning the town square into a sea of flickering light as darkness fell. 3 days later, on a crisp Saturday morning, Springfield held the largest funeral in its 142-year history. Over 2,000 people attended in person, with another 50,000 watching via live stream from around the world. The tiny white casket, adorned with blue roses and butterflies, sat at the front of St. Mary's Church. Buddy walked in the funeral procession, wearing a special vest that Michael had made, with Ethan's photo embroidered on it. In his gentle mouth, the faithful dog carried a small basket of white roses, never dropping a single one, walking with dignity and purpose, his head held high. He knows he's honoring Ethan, Sarah said, watching through her tears. He knows this is important. During the service, Father O'Brien spoke about the mystery and meaning of Buddy's devotion. This dog reminded us what pure love looks like, he said to the packed church. Love that asks for nothing in return. Love that stays present through suffering. Love that somehow knew exactly what this family needed and refused to rest until they found it. If that's not divine intervention, I don't know what is. The burial took place at Springfield Memorial Cemetery, on a gentle hill overlooking the town. As they lowered Ethan's tiny casket into the earth, a single butterfly, impossibly early for March, landed on the casket and stayed there until it was fully lowered. That's Grandma Rose, Patricia whispered, come to take him home. The town of Springfield erected a memorial bench near the very oak tree where Buddy had dug up the prayer box. The bronze plaque read, "In loving memory of Ethan James Thompson, March 15th, March 29th, 2025, and Buddy, the faithful guardian who taught us that love transcends all boundaries. Death is simply walking into the next room. The love never ends." Ethan's fund ultimately raised $2.3 million. After covering all expenses, the remaining $2.1 million was donated to the Children's Heart Foundation for research into congenital heart defects. The foundation created the Ethan Thompson Research Grant, which would fund studies for decades to come. 6 months after Ethan's death, a researcher using funds from Ethan's grant made a breakthrough discovery in understanding hypoplastic left heart syndrome. The research would eventually lead to a new surgical technique that would save dozens of babies' lives. Ethan's life mattered, Sarah said when she heard the news. His brief time here changed the world. He saved other babies just by being loved. Buddy lived for 10 more years after Ethan's death, a remarkably long life for a golden retriever. He remained gentle, loving, and protective of the Thompson family. When Sarah and Michael had another baby 3 years later, a healthy daughter they named Rose. After Sarah's grandmother, Buddy appointed himself her guardian too, sleeping beside her crib every single night. On a quiet autumn morning in 2035, Buddy passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 13. The Thompsons buried him in their backyard, beneath the old oak tree where he'd made his miraculous discovery, right next to where Grandma Rose's ashes had been scattered. He completed his mission, Michael said, kneeling beside the fresh grave. He kept his promise. He protected our family until this very last day. Sarah placed flowers on Buddy's grave, white roses, the same kind he'd carried at Ethan's funeral. "Thank you," she whispered to the earth. "Thank you for showing us that miracles are real, that love never dies, and that sometimes angels come with 4 legs and a wagging tail." Years later, Hollywood did make a movie about Buddy and baby Ethan. It premiered in Springfield, with all proceeds going to children's heart disease research. The film ended with actual footage from Ethan's funeral, Buddy walking in the procession, carrying the roses, his eyes filled with purpose and love. There wasn't a dry eye in the theater. The story of the dog who came to the dying baby in his final moments and what he did next became more than just a viral sensation. It became a testament to the mysterious, profound, and eternal nature of love itself. And in Springfield, on quiet evenings when the wind rustles through the old oak tree, people swear they can still hear it, the gentle sound of a baby's laugh, mixed with the soft bark of a faithful dog, both of them finally at peace. Their story echoing through time is a reminder that love, indeed, never ends.